Act normal.
We are live right now. All right, I'm gonna pull up the YouTube real quick to see when people start going in. And I find the live stream. There we go. Live. Boom. There we go. We got one right now watching. All right, we are rocking and rolling, Mr. Ron. You can start.
Oh, I can start. All right.
Yes.
Gentlemen, welcome to my little TED Talk for RSP on building wealth. Probably your first thought is, hey, I'm like 15, 16, 17 years old. I don't even have a job. I play baseball. So what do I know about any of this? Don't worry about it. What we're going to talk about today is actual concepts that I can tell you without a doubt that if you apply them to your life, if you remember what I say, I'm going to throw you a bunch of numbers. You won't remember the numbers, but if you remember the concepts, you will absolutely build greater wealth over time than if you don't. Okay? This isn't to talk about getting rich or even investing in the stock market. It's about concepts that when you apply them to your life, you'll build a level of wealth that's very different than if you don't. And I can tell you that with absolute certainty because for the last 28 years, that's what I've done for people. So my actual job is I help families build wealth. Investments, taxation, estate planning, doesn't matter. It's not really that relevant. But the point is I have literally watched what I'm going to talk about today work for 28 years. And I can tell you if you remember some of these concepts, they work. All right? So let's talk about what's going to happen for you guys if you're 15, 16, 17 years old and what's coming for you. Right now you're in high school. So you're pretty much paid for by your parents, right? So the next couple steps of your life, you work your way into college, right? You start to grow. Maybe you're playing baseball in college. Maybe you get your first job if you don't have a job yet. But you start to transition to where you're on your own money, right? You have your own money because you're able to get a job. You then come out of college and you start to really transition to, those things that come next. So sometime after college, maybe you meet a girl, right? So you decide that you're going to get married. Once that happens, things get more expensive, right? So you meet this girl, then you want to buy a house, and then you want to have kids, and those kids want to play baseball, and that's expensive, right? So when we talk about building wealth, and what I'm going to talk about is really freedom, okay? So when I say building wealth, that's really what I'm talking about is personal freedom that over your life, when you have money to do the things you want to, you're more free than if you have debt and you don't have money, right? So it's not about getting rich, it's about building wealth. And wealth is really freedom. So when you have a job, you go to your job and you trade your time, and in return you get money, right? So if you get your first job and you go to Publix and you work at Publix and let's say you go for an 8-hour day and you're making $15 an hour, right? Government's going to take some of your money. There's going to be other things that come out of it, so you get a little bit less, right? But to get your money, you had to trade your time for money. So you're always a slave, if you're always trading your time for money, to having to go and give someone your time or something similar, right? So building wealth, building investments are money that comes to you that you don't have to work for, okay? So all these other things, when you go to work, you have to trade your time for money. When you have investment income, that is money that comes to you that you don't have to trade your time for. And that is what the freedom is that I'm talking about is, right? So that's what I want you guys to remember. You're not going to remember a lot of the numbers that we talk about today, but absolutely the concepts. If you apply these to your life, they work, all right? So I want to give you some concepts, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about the worst financial mistake I ever made personally when I was young. So just out of college, I had my first real job. I was maybe 2 years out of college, and I had driven pretty crappy cars my entire life, right? So I had worked in restaurants, whatever. So I had driven pretty crappy cars, and I was making money for the first time. So the first thing I did when I started making money is I went out and I bought myself a Toyota 4Runner, which at the time, 25 years ago, was top of the line, right? So leather interior, all the stuff. Signed a lease, 4 years, $597 a month, which is a lot. So, and that's what I'm going to say. So that sounds like a lot in today's numbers. Well, 25 years ago, that's probably equal to about $1,200 a month today.
I was about to say 25 years ago, that's crazy.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. But here's the thing, like I didn't have a girlfriend, I wasn't married, I was making money, I was sharing an apartment with another guy, so we were living pretty cheap, right? So I went and I signed this lease, 4 years, basically $600 a month. And 6 weeks later, I met the girl that I was going to get married to. Met my wife, Luke's mom. So like I said, once you meet a girl, life starts to change, right? So you start to want the things like a house, and you want things like, kids come along and life gets really expensive. Well, I had 3 more years of $600 a month of payments that I was locked into. All right. So let's talk about me making a different decision and how that would affect things, right? So let's say instead of spending $600 a month on a vehicle, right? And let's say I spent $300, half of what I would have spent, right? $300 still would have bought me a really good car. Really nice car for $300, right? I'd have still been living pretty good, right? So let's say I took that $300 and I invested that, right? So I put that into an IRA or a 401k. We're not talking about a whole lot of money. We're talking about $300 a month. So if I took that $300, I put it in my 401k or my IRA, $300 a month times 12 months is $3,600 a month. So it comes out to about $14,400. All right. So over long periods of time, the stock market returns 10% a year. That's what it does. That's why I gave you that chart, right? Large stocks over time, they return 10% a year. And I'm going to simplify some concepts. So when I say 10% a year, that's an average. It doesn't do that every year in and out. It's up and down and sideways, and that's how it works. But over long periods of time, you get 10%. So I'm going to use some math for you. So let's say instead of buying the Toyota 4Runner, right? When you get out of college, you have your first job. Instead of buying the Toyota 4Runner, I take that $300 a month, comes out to $14,000 over 4 years, and I invest that in the stock market 10% a year from then until now, right? So that's 25 years. What do you think $14,400 grows to today? Just give me a guess.
70 grand? 30 grand.
He says 30. Anybody? Any other guesses? 31,000. Oh, $1 over. All right, I see it. All right. All right. The actual number is $156,000. $156,000. All right. So you're wondering why? What the heck? How do you grow $14,400 to $156,000? All right. Let's take a little farther, right? So I'm talking about not even doing more than the 14, just the money I didn't spend on the car. So let's say it's 52. I'm 52 now, and so that grows to 156,000. Normal retirement age is around 50 or 65 years old. So now I'm at 156,000. I grow that at 10% a year until I'm 65 years old. What do we think we get to?
Let's call it, let's say like 3.5 million.
No, you're way up.
Okay.
You're so up.
I understand.
It's about $500,000, $530,000, right? So when I say the worst financial mistake I ever made, right, we're talking about me buying too much of a car, and over time, it literally goes from being, $14,000 to $538,000. Concept of compounding interest and why it works. So like I said, I'm simplifying some things because you guys are high school players. But I want you to remember these. All right, so $14,000, right? So we grow that for 1 year at 10%. How much interest do we make? This is easy, guys. Come on. 1,400, right? Okay. So after 1 year, we go from 14,000 to 15,400, right? Year 2 is where magic starts to happen. So this is what starts to happen. So year one, we made $1,400 of interest. Year two, we make another $1,400 of interest, right? But we also, yeah, we do. Just wait. But we also still have the $1,400 from the first year, right? And we make another 10% on that. So we make an additional $140, right? So we make interest on our interest. Money's starting to work for us. Remember when I said when you go to work and you have a job, you have to start trading your time for money? But when you have investments, they start to work for you. That's how you build wealth, compounding interest. Year three, you got another 1,400 off the original. You got another 140 off the original interest. And then you get another 14 bucks off of the interest again. And it starts to compound over and over and over. And that's how you grow wealth over time. Are we talking about a whole lot of money when we're talking about like $300 a month? Nope, that's just something just about anybody can do. So let's talk about just investing $300 a month when you guys get out. Say you get your first job and you go, making money, I don't know what this 401k thing is, right? I don't know what my IRA is. I don't know what these things are, so I'm not going to touch them. Let's talk about what that actually means. All right, so let's say you get out and you start working and you're 25 years old to get out of college. So maybe you give yourself a year to start your career, right? So you got $300 a month that you start investing. Not a whole lot of money, right? So we'll use that same 10%, make it real easy. All right, so you do that just $300 and you do it from the time you're 25 until you're 65. Growing that at 10%, which the stock market gives you. Nothing special, no special investment returns, just taking what the stock market gives you. What do you think you get to? Not even ever increasing it. Nobody wants to guess?
150.
150,000? All right, anybody else? It's actually close to 1.6 million. Right? Yep, it's a lot of money. Are we talking about people who have a lot of money making money? No, we're talking about $300 a month, right? And the reason, the most important thing, the reason that's important for you guys in high school and to know as you're in college and after is because that time, that early time in your life is the easiest time for you guys to build wealth. Because you have something on your, you have something called time that slowly goes away. Let's take another thing. So one of you guys started at $25 or 25 years old. One of you started at 25. The other one waited till they're 35, right? You got out of college, maybe you had a baby young or something happened. You didn't start saving. So you waited till you were 35 years old, just 10 years later. Same $300 a month. You do that until you're 65.
300 a month, you said?
300 a month, same 300. I'm just using 300 a month because that was what I used from the car. So from 25 to 65, if you do that, $300 a month, you grow to almost $1.6 million. You wait till you're 35, right? So you don't do it when you get out of college. You just wait a few years. So now you're 10 years less. You're only investing, let's say $300 a month. So you're investing $36,000 less for 10 years less. What do you guys think you get to? 400 is actually close.
350.
It's a little higher. It's about $550,000. Okay. Now, we talked. So, if you started at 25, you get to 1.6 million. You wait till you're 35, you only get to 600,000. Was there a big difference in how much you invested? $36,000. The magic is time, right? And that's why I start talking to you guys about. You look at it, say, hey, I'm only 15, 16 years old. If you have a part-time job now, you can actually start investing a little bit through your parents. But the thing that you have the most right now is time, and the longer you wait, the more important, or the harder it gets to happen. So the only number I'm going to give you that I think is important for you to know, and this is kind of funny. So when you start investing, or when you're young, the mindset I want you to have is I want you to get $100,000 invested in an IRA or a 401k as quick as you can. All right, $100,000. Why is that important? Because this is kind of an interesting concept. Once you get your first $100,000 and that starts to grow, all the money after that comes a lot quicker. All right, so it's a weird concept. So here it is. You invest $10,000 a year. I'm going to use a slightly bigger number. And you grow that at 10%. How long do you think it takes you to get to $100,000? It's about 7 years. All right? So you're investing $10,000 a year, growing it at 10%. It takes you 7 years to get your first $100,000. All right? So you do that when you're young. How long do you think it takes you to grow that from $100,000 to $200,000 by still investing $10,000 and growing it? If it took you 7 years to get your first $100,000, 4.25. So it takes you 7 years to get your first $100,000, but only 4 years to get your second. All right? Now you want to grow that 200 and grow it to $300,000. Doing the same thing, still investing $10,000 a year. Continue to add to it. Now it only takes you 3 years to get another $100,000. To go from $300,000 to $400,000, it only takes you 2.25 years. To go from $400,000 to $500,000, it takes a little under 2 years. Once you get that first $100,000, everything starts to speed up. Because what starts to happen is you start to get that interest on your interest, right? So if you have $100,000, you make 10%, you only made 10 grand. Once you get up to $400,000, you make 10% on that money, you made $40,000. And it starts to work for you. So that goes back to that freedom we were talking about, right? So instead of having to trade your time, you've got your money going to work for you. We're not even talking about investing a lot. If you have a 401k at work, and that's something like if you go to work for an employer, they have an automatic thing where you can take money out of your paycheck and then they match it. So to get to 10,000, you don't even have to use all your own money. Use some of the company's money, right? Tax-free. But you get to that 10,000 and start to grow that. As long as you do it when you're young, it's a very easy way to build wealth. You just can't wait. Okay, so let's actually take this for a second. So I've used some pretty easy concepts. What we're looking at is really just a stock market chart. So the S&P 500 is really just, it's the 500 largest companies in the US. Nothing special, right? It's Apple, Amazon, Nvidia, Google, Facebook. It's all the things you know about. It gives you 10% a year over time, but it doesn't give you 10% every year. That's not really how it works, okay? In fact, there are years when the stock market goes negative, and if you want to take that chart for a second, it's actually your annualized stock market returns. And I'm using the stock market only because it's the most common investment that everybody knows about. So, you know, it doesn't go straight up 10% a year. What it does do is it goes up, you know, over time, 3 out of every 4 years. All right? So, but what that means is that 1 out of every 4 years, you'll actually lose money. Doesn't mean every 4th year, but it just means on average, 1 out of every 4 years, the stock market actually goes down. And it never goes down on good news, by the way. So anytime you see the stock market going down, what's actually happening is people are afraid, right? So some of the worst mistakes I've ever seen people make is they get frustrated. We're scared when the stock market goes down. But what I can tell you is if you look back at this chart, and if we just look at the gray line on top, what do you see happening over longer periods of time? It just kind of always goes up over long periods of time, right? But there are periods where it's 2, 3, 4 years where the stock market doesn't make money. In fact, there have been periods of 10 years where the stock market doesn't make money. But over longer periods of time, you get that 10%. But my message is 2 things. Start early, and don't be afraid of, you know, the ups and downs of the market and how they happen. All right, so we talked about saving a little bit. If you really want to build wealth, I can tell you without a doubt, some of the thing that will stop you from generating wealth and making money over time is spending. People talk about budgets. Budgets work a little bit. So I'm going to give you a mindset, though. So when you get out of college, right, and you're making your own money and you're going out to spend stuff, you're not living off your parents and whatnot, it's you. You'll kind of be tempted to spend everything. But I'd like to get a mindset of you probably don't have a job yet, or anybody have a job yet? Nobody yet? One person has a job yet? Okay. So here's what I want you to start doing, to start thinking about spending and what it means and how it affects you over time. Start to think, let's say you pretend in your mind you have a job at Publix and you're making, you know, you're bringing home $12 a month after, or $12 an hour after after all expenses. So you go to Chipotle and you buy a burrito and it's $12, $13. What does that actually cost you? An hour of your time. That's what you actually spent. So start to do the math. Start to think through your spending in those ways. You get older, you start to make a lot more money. Then a burrito costs you less of your own time, and it doesn't hurt so much, right? But as you're young, it really starts to matter. So let's now take that. Let's take that theory and let's talk about debt, right? So one of the first things that you're going to have access to debt-wise is a college loan, right? If you need it. Maybe you're lucky enough to where your parents can pay for everything. If you don't, you're going to have debt that comes from college. The first loan that you can get when you go through is a subsidized loan through the federal government. It comes to $5,500 a year. So you end up out of college, you have about $22,000 in debt just from that if you take all that. If you take that $22,000 and you pay that off over 15 years, it comes out to about $200 a month, right? It's not the end of the world. But if we remember when we talked about the time value of money, you start to take on the debt, and then you start to not be able to invest the $200 a month. It's a lot more common for people to come out of college with $50,000 of debt. I had the $22,000 range. You come out with $50,000 of debt, you're looking at a $400 to $500 a month payment. So a lot of times when you start signing your names to those loans, you don't really realize what it means to the rest of your life. But I want you to know, like, as you get that first signature of debt in your life, like, that is something that affects you over a long period of time. So really analyze if you're looking at a college offer for baseball, or you're looking at where you want to go to school, the cost of one school to another, and you're analyzing what you want to study, it really makes a difference. Like, if you go to one college, it's $10,000 more than another, and you're doing it on debt, and you come out with an extra $40,000 of debt because of it, that's going to affect you for a really long time. And that could cost you, literally, to not be able to take that money and invest it, hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's kind of the thing that I wanted you guys to know. All right, so most of my prepared remarks are over, but I want to give you one thing to think about, or actually one thing to do over the summer. What I wanted to give you is kind of a mindset of saving, knowing to do it early, knowing to do it over time, and to avoid debt. But if you're playing for power, which I assume you are if you're here, then you're going to be in the car a lot this summer, right? You're going to be traveling to North Carolina, you're going to be traveling to Atlanta, you're going to be traveling to whatever, a million different places. So I'm going to ask you to actually listen to a book on YouTube, right? So you're going to take, say, an 8-hour trip to Atlanta. I want you to take 4 hours of one of those times to listen to a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. All right, it's a lot of things I talked about today, but he goes into a lot more depth of it. So what it is, it's a book that was actually written 100 years ago, and you're going, okay, well, that probably makes it boring. Well, it's not, really. It's still worth doing. It's not totally boring. So, but what it is it's written as a story of a guy that started as a goat herder in Babylon, thousands of years ago. But all the theories, as he's having conversations with people about how he built wealth over time and the things that he applied into his life. So what I'd tell you is take about 4 hours of your time and, listen to the book. And I promise you it would be worth your time. It's literally half of one trip in one direction. So let's have a little fun. You guys want to learn about stocks a little bit since we have some time? All right. You guys got a phone? Pull up your browser, go to cnbc.com. This will be the easiest way to do this. There's an app for it too, but if you just have the browser, just go to cnbc.com. So let's learn just a little bit for fun. Tell me when you guys find it. Looks a little bit like this. Go in the upper right-hand corner, you see this little search thing. Click on that and then type in CMG. CMG. Then the first one that comes up is a company called Chipotle Mexican Grill. Figured we'd start with something you guys know a little bit about, because I wanted you to kind of understand what a stock is. Did you guys find it get to something that looks a little bit like this? Yep. All right. If we scroll down, there's a couple things. Actually, let's do this. So take your phone and go sideways. So the first thing we'll look at is this chart. It's actually the stock price of Chipotle Mexican Grill over time. You see it kind of going up over time and going sideways. It goes down a little bit. In fact, it actually goes down for 2 years before it goes back up. Right? All they do is they make beans and rice. What do you think Chipotle Mexican Grill is worth? $80 billion. 80, Chipotle Mexican Grill was actually bought out by, or was actually started by McDonald's, which is weird to say. All right, go back straight up to the top. We're going to look at this. You're going to scroll down, and this is going to tell you a few things so you can kind of learn about a company. You see something called market capitalization, or market cap, and this is 80.255. That's the actual value of Chipotle. It's $80.25 billion. If you own stock in Chipotle Mexican Grill, what you actually own is a piece of Chipotle Mexican Grill. So that's what a stock is. It's actually literally ownership of the company, of the underlying company, right? So Chipotle has 27 million shares outstanding. So if you own 100 shares of Chipotle, you have 100 shares out of 27.42 million. You're not exactly a controlling interest, but you literally have a legal right to the profits and to actually vote on issues that relate to Chipotle Mexican Grill. That's what actually a stock is over time. So what happens is, as Chipotle grows, as they open more stores, as they sell more beans and rice and chicken or whatever they sell, then over time the company does well, the stock price goes up, and that's how you make money. All right. If we go down, we see something called ratios and profitability. Earnings per share, Chipotle makes $44 per share, but their share price is $3,000 a share. So they have something called a price to earnings. So when you say you're buying a piece of Chipotle Mexican Grill, what you're doing is you're buying a piece of the profits going forward, right? But at the current stock price of $3,000 and $44 a share in earnings, you're paying for 66 years of earnings up front when you buy the stock, which is a lot. Normally you're paying 16 to 18. Makes it interesting. So by the way, the gross return for Chipotle when you buy something from them is 45%. If we go down, let's see. I think this goes sideways on here. I wanted you guys to actually be able to read this. You can do this for just about any company, but it tells you really, you know, if you just want the basics of a company to understand it, you could do this for Amazon, you could do it for Netflix. It's all free. It tells you exactly what the company earns and, you know, what the company's worth. A lot of companies pay something called a dividend, and a dividend is profits that's actually paid out to you every quarter. There's really only two ways that you can invest. You can buy stocks and bonds, or you can buy bonds, which is a debt, right? It's a CD or something, where you can be an owner of something. And so when you buy a stock, you're an owner of something. If you buy real estate, you're an owner of something. Over time, the value of any company is related to whether their earnings are going up and whether they're making more money over time, right? But in the short term, the stock price doesn't have to do with the earnings. It's just a matter of whether someone's buying the stock or, you know, whether a lot of people are buying or selling the stock. The value of any asset that you have over time is only related to whether more people want to buy it or sell it, right? So you could say something like a piece of artwork isn't worth a whole lot because you can't do anything with it, but if a lot of people want to buy that artwork, the value of it goes up. And that's why the stock market goes up, is because if more people want to own a company over time, then the company's stock price goes up. But you could have something like, you got a war in Russia and Ukraine, right? So that can scare people out of the stock market. But let's talk about Chipotle Mexican Grill. So there's a war in Ukraine, but does that mean people buy any less beans and rice? Nope, really doesn't. But the stock price could drop for a small period of time because people say there's a war in Ukraine and now it scares everybody. So the price of beans and rice goes down for Chipotle. Kind of weird, right? Anyway, you guys have any questions? Any things that are coming up that you want to know about?
I had one. So let's say, well, let's give myself an example. I'm 32 this year.
Yep.
A little bit of money in savings. Like, good little amount, and my wife and I don't invest.
Mhm.
What's a good place for a 32-year-old to start, or just
Right.
like building wealth?
Yeah. Okay. So there's long-term money and then there's short-term money. Okay. So when I've talked a lot about investing when you're young, I'm talking about long-term money, right? So you've got two types of accounts that you can utilize. You probably don't have a 401k through a smaller company like this, but you have an IRA. Okay. So an IRA means that you can put money into something that you're not able to touch until you're 60. You can pull it up to $6,500 a year into it, and you don't pay taxes on that money in the year that you put it in. So if you had an income of $50,000 and you put $6,000 into it, you only pay taxes on 44. Once that money grows in, you put $6,000 in it, it grows to $50,000 by the time you retire. Well, if you pull out the $50,000, you pay taxes on the full 50. Okay? The other way to do it is called a Roth IRA. All right? So here's what happens with a Roth. It's the exact opposite of the traditional. You put money into it, you get no tax to break now. So if you made $50,000, you put $6,000 into it, right? You still pay taxes on $50,000, but that $6,000 grows to $50,000. You pull $50,000 out, you pay no taxes on $50,000. So for younger people, for you guys, the first thing you want to do is utilize a Roth. And you can actually do that when you're young. So let's say you're 17, 18 years old, you can actually use a Roth IRA. You can start putting money away now, so long as you have earned income. You have to have a job, right? Your parents can't just give you $2,000, you put it into the Roth. You have to actually have had a job and made some actual income. So the first thing is you can start utilizing an IRA and put that money away. That's your longer term money. Shorter term money, it just really depends on what you want that money to do. You could buy some individual stocks. You could buy mutual funds, you could buy ETFs, you could buy CDs. It just depends on kind of when you need that money. The sooner that you need that money, the more safe it has to be, right? So if I go back to, we talk about this, I said the stock market's up 3 out of every 4 years. Well, what you don't want to do is invest money in the stock market that you might need for a house in 2 or 3 years, because you could put money into the stock market and see it down 20% in 3 years. That does happen, okay? So money that you need in the short term, money that you need to say, we're going to have a baby, we're going to have expenses, we're going to buy a house, we're going to do whatever, that money's got to remain pretty safe, right? And you can still, in safe money right now, you can get 4, 5, 6%. I mean, you still make money. Even a savings account, you should be making 5%, okay? But if you've done nothing ever and you've got some money in savings, you really should have at least an IRA. And if your spouse works for a company with a 401k, you can really, as a couple, you could put more money into her 401k, right, to start that way. But the kind of your basic account is you got to start an IRA, or if you work for an employer, you'll have a 401k. And the cool thing about a 401k is that when you put money in, your company will match it. So let's say my company, we match 100% up to 4%, right? So I put in 4% of my salary. My company matches that. So on day one, I doubled my money, right? So if I put in $5,000, my company puts in $5,000. I literally have $5,000 of free money on day one, right? So now we talk about that. We take that $10,000 and now we're compounding that over long periods of time. Now you're talking about really building some wealth, but especially if you start when you're young, right? So I go back to my biggest mistake. I had a 401k. I was putting a little bit of money into it, like $100, $150 a month, because somebody told me I should when I was that age. And even though I had a degree in finance, like I didn't really, when I first got out of college, like I was, I'm going out tonight, I need money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so exactly. But so I was utilizing it, but not to the effect where I could, right? So that's why I say, the time value of starting when you're 25, 24, 23 is great. Yeah. But even at 32, if you haven't done it, there's still plenty of time, right? It's just a matter of you've really got to get started and get rolling, right?
Yeah, that's true.
All right, what else?
I got a question. I got, so this summer I'll be having like 3 sources of income.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I have about like 3,400 just in a savings account just like sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of wondering what I should do with that, like what the first move would be. Because I've been thinking about investing, and you hear all these different things like stock market, do this, bonds and stuff. What, in your opinion, what would be like the best move for me to start? Because I turned 21 this Friday.
Awesome.
Me and my girlfriend have been together for 7 years. Thinking about getting married soon. So kind of
All right.
best advice you could give, I guess.
Yeah. So when you talk about that money, that 3,600, what do you want that money to do for you? That's the first thing you have to know about your money. Like, is it money that you might need if you get married? Like, is that money you might need for a ring? Or is this money you say, okay, well, I want to start building wealth over time? So
Yeah.
that's the first question.
I mean, we both talked about it, like, we don't care about the ring. It's kind of just like a symbol of
Mm-hmm.
what it means rather than
Sure.
what it's worth. So, not really caring about that, kind of just looking towards eventually saving up for a house.
Right,
stuff
sort of
for the
things.
long term.
Okay. So here's the cool thing about a Roth IRA. So I mentioned that you put money into a Roth, it grows over long periods of time, then you pull it out and it's tax-free. But it has a second benefit, okay? As long as the money's been in there for 5 years, you can pull out your basis at no taxes. So if you were to take $3,600, you put that in there and say 7 years from now, you want to buy a house. Well, your 3,600, say it's grown to like $8,000. Well, you can't pull it all out, but you can pull your $3,600 out at no taxes, right? So that money grew for all that time, and you still have access to the principal.
Okay.
And that's only with a Roth IRA. So is that money going to grow for you so you can buy more? No. But you grow to $8,000, you pull out your $3,600, and you still have $5,000 in a Roth to grow, and you still had your principal back.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I think that's your first move. But even if you don't put all of it in, right? So if you've only got $3,600 in savings, then maybe you don't put that all into the Roth. But even if you start with $1,000 or $2,000 in the Roth, we've talked about small numbers like $300 a month or whatever. You get started. You get a basic in there of a couple $1,000s, and then you start. Over the summer, you have $200 extra that month, and you throw it in there. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but given the amount of time that you have, yeah, man, it'll grow.
Mhm.
It's not the type of advice where you're going to look at it in 3 years and go, that guy really changed my life. But you might look at it 20 years from now and go, well, damn, that talk was worth my time. Because it will change. I mean, you start adding in a couple $100 a month here and there when you have it. Just get it open, get it started, and then when you got a little extra, throw it into it. You don't have to be fancy. Don't worry about what you're investing in so much. So when I say that, I don't mean don't pay any attention to it, but just buy a broad fund. You could just buy a S&P fund. You could buy just a growth fund. It doesn't matter. Just buy the if you open it at a cheap place like TD Ameritrade or Schwab, they'll have like a basic growth fund. It'll just tell you, hey, I just need a growth fund, and they'll give you something. It's not that complicated. It'll grow over time. Don't worry about whether it's up or down at any given time. Just every time you have a little bit of money, start putting it in there, and it'll start to matter. It'll matter 20 years from now, but it will matter. And just remember that you can always access that principal to where if you say, well, we want to buy a house,
Yeah.
well, you can access that principal back.
Are you saying Roth IRA through Charles Schwab?
You just Schwab, TD,
'Cause I
just
have-
one of the cheap,
I
one
have
of
an
the cheap
account with
ones.
them, but I've done nothing with it, so I'm kind of just like,
I'm just telling, just use the cheapest place you can
Yeah.
because you're only talking about a little bit of money. You don't need a lot of advice, to be honest. All you need is you call them, say, log in online and say, I just need a growth fund. They'll give you a pretty good growth fund, and you put the money in, and you don't have to think about it a whole lot. Like, just find the cheapest place. Schwab. We own E-Trade. E-Trade's good. I mean, yeah, it's not. It's just it doesn't have to be. My point is, it doesn't have to be complicated because you've got time. You don't have to do anything special. You just have to get started, right?
Mm-hmm.
So put that money in. Anytime you got money, you keep adding to it. We've only talked about $300 a month, man. So even by the time I talked about starting at 25, you're starting at 21, right?
Yeah.
It's an extra 5 years. That means you can even start with less. And then what's going to happen, the arc of your life, like you're going to make more money over time. So instead of putting $100 or $200 in a month, then it starts to go into 3, 4, 5 by the time you're like 25, 26 years old. To start to generate real wealth, you don't need a lot of money. You need a lot of time to do the right things, right? And so you guys here, you have a lot of time. That's what you got. So if your parents have a little money they want to do it for you, you can open a custodial account. So all that means is money your parents put into you that you can start to invest. You can even do a custodial IRA. So you can do a regular custodial account that's not an IRA. It's technically your parents' money that becomes yours when you're 21, but if they put a little money into it, you can get started that way. You can do a custodial IRA. And the benefit to the IRA over the regular account is that the IRA you don't pay any taxes on. Those are kind of your first two moves. It's like really just get if you're really young and you can put it away, start a Roth, and then you still have access to the basis, right? Because that's your biggest problem. So it's this combination of I want to invest long term, but I also, I've got those things that are going to come up, right? So that's why the Roth actually really works, because you're probably not in a high tax bracket either. So
I know another one, as I kind of thought about as you were talking to him. When someone wants to work with, say, with someone like you, like a financial planner like you, what's the steps look like? What's that process look like? Is it kind of like a pretty smooth in the beginning, pretty easy, or is it more like in the beginning it's a lot of harder work, like this, papers, whatever, everything set up, and then it's like pretty good from there, I guess? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of my clients are older. I mean, I literally have worked over 28 years. I work with people everywhere from those that are just starting out. I've had some. It's not really what I do now. I literally also have families that, literally have hundreds of millions of dollars that I work with, like not even, we're not talking about the same different things. So when you're young, to be honest, you don't really need a financial planner. You just need some of the financial basics. You need to know to start young. You need to know to do an IRA. You need to control your spending, right? You need to not sign up for debt that you don't understand, right? So before you sign the things that are going to come first, the first debt you're ever going to probably have if you do it is a college loan. So just know what you're signing up for and start to analyze, do I go to college or do I go to junior college and then graduate from a 4-year? And then the next thing that's going to come along is a credit card. Just be really careful of credit cards is what I tell you. The average annual interest rate on a credit card is 20%. Working against you. I mean, we talked about what 10% does for you over time. Imagine 20% working against you, right? So for younger people, what I'd tell you is you don't really need you don't need a full financial planner like myself. You just need to know the basics. I mentioned that the richest man in Babylon. Like if you're young, honestly, like take 3.5 hours and listen to the book on YouTube. It's worth every minute of your time to understand those concepts. And then, rather than hire someone when you're young, man, just get a pamphlet, right? You need about 5 different things to know. Put money away. If you got a baby, you need to have, once you start to have a family, that you kind of do need to talk with someone. But for really young people, it's not that complicated. Right? It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. It's time. Take what the market gives you. Don't be scared. Do what you can, as much as you can when you're young, and that creates freedom for you when you're older, right? Because as you get older, so you put all that money away when you're young, when you're 25, 35 years old, all of a sudden you get to age 50, right? And your kids are playing travel ball and it gets really expensive. And then they want to go to college and that's expensive too, right? So instead of having to worry about, well, now I'm behind on my own retirement, I don't have any money, like you've got this freedom. So that's what's going to happen for you. Like if you actually start to put the money away and start to put, even a couple $100 a month, like all of a sudden you get to where you're like 35 and 40 and expenses start coming up and you've got a little different freedom, right? That's what I was talking about. Wealth is freedom, because instead of having to worry about trading your time for money, like you've got money that works for you. Yeah. And that's where the freedom comes in, right? That's what building wealth is about. That's why I tell you to start when you're young, is because the younger you start, the more free you are when you're a little bit older.
Yeah, I like that. Good.
Cool.
Anybody else have any questions?
Are you good at math?
Do what?
Are you really good at math?
I'm pretty good at math, yeah. Yeah, so I'll tell you a funny story. I went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas, which is a pretty good D1. My parents weren't in business. They were, healthcare. So when I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I started out college as a philosophy major and thought I was going to go to law school. And also I just thought it sounded really cool to tell girls I was a philosophy major, right? So I got into my first class and looked around and looked at the other people in the class and thought, these people are freaking weird. So I went to the business school and to be honest, that's how I found what I really loved, because I got into my finance classes. Once you go to the business school or you start in a business school, you just have to take classes in management, you take classes in accounting and finance and advertising. You take all these base level courses and you kind of figure out what makes sense to you. I got into my finance classes and it all made sense to me, right? And I looked around and not everybody was getting it, but to me it made sense. And that's how I knew what I wanted to do, because I had something that was interesting to me that I seemed to be better at than the people around me. Just good at math, but I'm better at concepts. So math has concepts and then it has the actual math. But that's, also when you start to figure out what you want to do with your life, you guys, you can start to rule out things you don't like, right? And then you figure out a few things that you can. And, that's kind of how you figure out what you want to do with your life and where you're going to go. It's the hardest thing when you're young is to figure out what you want to do with your life. So the next thing that's going to change your lives, I chatted about with this gentleman, artificial intelligence is a real thing that's going to change your lives over the next 4 or 5 years. So I was at a dinner with the CEO of Blackstone, which is the biggest investment company, private equity firm in the world. And the guy had donated a wing to MIT. So he was chatting with the president of MIT and they were talking about artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence was actually invented at MIT. So what the president was telling him, he said, the artificial intelligence that's out there right now has an IQ of somewhere around 150 to 180, which is, equivalent to an average person is about 100 IQ. So 150 to 180 is, not Einstein, but, a pretty smart individual. Within 4 years, artificial intelligence will have an IQ of around 12,000. So start to imagine that it's going to change before you guys are, barely out of high school and before you're through college. The entire world is going to look a little different, right? So when you start to figure out what you want to do with your life, make sure you understand how it's going to affect the job you want to go into. You don't want to go get yourself into debt or go and spend 4 years in a job that disappears. But there'll also be jobs that you can't imagine right now that 3 or 4 years from now come up. So you start to get a degree that something that you like, but then there's going to be jobs that come up and career paths that we can't even imagine right now, and it's really going to change our lives. So that's my part. I think that's all I had.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Awesome.